Very good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for making the time to join us today. My name is Nikhil Vaswani, and I am a junior consultant at Turner& Townsend, and today we're kindly joined by Claire Brown, senior consultant at Turner& Townsend. This is a retrofit information, support, and expertise event, which is fully funded by the Department of Energy, Security, and Net Zero, and is delivered by Turner& Townsend. I will now hand over to Claire for today's presentation. Thank you. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you so much, and welcome to everyone. If it's your first masterclass or you've been to many, everyone is always welcome. So thank you so much for joining us today. So as I said, if you haven't joined us before on a masterclass, we like to set out in terms of some of the details that we'll go through so that you have an understanding of what to expect in the session. So we start off with kind of the why, in terms of why this is an important topic for us to be just kind of discussing, but also thinking about some of the mechanisms that we can engage there. Also talking through some of the heating options. We won't go through the whole range of different heating options that there are. We will just cover some of the kind of key ones, the most common that we see. And with anything, what I would say is that there's no one size fits all. So we should make sure that any kind of planned retrofit really thinks about the specifics of that archetype, thinking about the residents who are there and the setting and what's going to be most appropriate. So there are lots of kind of different options. We will just be applying a light touch to it there. Also thinking about some of the key issues about engagement, thinking about the digital connectivity challenges sometimes with newer technologies that are different from traditional, and really thinking about kind of some of those details. We'll pull it all together, and as Nikhil said, we have some sharing of kind of other resources for you to have a look at your own time, as well as when you get the slides, you can share those with colleagues, invite them to have a look at the recording of this at their own time as well. So we'll start off then with the why. Absolutely, we have multiple challenges that we face in housing. One of the key things that we are trying to do is reduce the amount of carbon emissions that are associated with our buildings and the way that we do things. If we are going to meet our targets, which are set by the UK government, we need to significantly reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that is associated with the space heating in our residence, in our homes, in our bungalows, in our flats, whatever we call that residential place where we kind of look in or work with. And what we need to do is significantly reduce this. This is going to be a challenge. There will be many different challenges as well. So this is part of a suite of modules that we kind of look at around really engaging tenants and kind of how that part is going to be really important in the success of anything. So if we go back to kind of the details of some of this, it's really understanding kind of where that kind of energy use is going to be coming from. We know proportionally different homes, different residential properties will have different proportions, but this is a kind of generalized kind of proportion in terms of where we see it. So hopefully on the pie chart on the left, you can see that the space heating is the largest chunk that we can see. Over 70% of energy and kind of carbon is around that space heating. Part of that is around our fabric, the loss of heat through our fabric. And when we're talking about fabric, we're talking about the walls, we're talking about the floors, we're talking about the doors, the windows, the roof. And different challenges are faced there. Because if we're trying to heat the space and heat the occupants, we don't want to be losing that through the fabric. That is a whole other kind of masterclass, and I would advise you to kind of have a look at that. We're thinking about the different services and how heat is delivered within the home. So over the next couple of slides, we'll have a look at some of those particular details. I'm really a fan of kind of understanding what the kind of current situation is. So the English Housing Survey from 2021 really shows us how currently that situation is. in your portfolio, your property, your estate, whatever it might be, you might have a particular type of heating system. And this chart is showing us that English kind of that broad brush of what it looks like. So hopefully you can see on the left-hand side, we've got that boiler systems with radiators are the most kind of typical ones we find across the different tenures. So if you are looking at owner occupied, that's the left-hand kind of column. And if you are private rented, that's the next column, local authority, and then social landlord is the next one. And you can see we've got other examples here as well in terms of storage radiators, room heaters, communal, and then warm air systems. As we progress in terms of decarbonisation, we're expecting to see that this proportion across all tenures will change as we decarbonise and move away from fossil fuel-based heating systems. Because of that change, we absolutely need to engage with people. Without a home, a building is just it's just a building. So we need to think about, okay, how are we going to communicate this? And how are we, if we're planning on changing that heating, how are we going to kind of really think about how we're going to do this with a positive outcome, because we want that household to engage, to be satisfied that they understand what is going on, that they understand the technology as well. So here are some kind of examples of opportunities, particularly if you are coming from a tenant liaison perspective or an asset management perspective, or in fact you are a tenant. Some of these opportunities are presented through that addressing of engagement across the board. So thinking about satisfaction, it's going to be really important. Well-being absolutely links into that. Things like those wider health and social benefits. We know that if we can achieve thermal comfort, so we're all different people, and we all have different levels of thermal comfort, and that's about being satisfied in the space you're in with how warm or how cold you are. So recognizing that different vulnerabilities in residents or tenants will present different thermal comfort levels. So understanding how that needs to play into any regime that we want to be thinking about. If you are involved in maintenance, we can see that there are opportunities for less calls, less call outs around heating and heating controls, heating systems, heating technology. That in itself can help really build upon better customer relationships. We also have the potential around saving money and saving energy. The challenge around energy savings, as we all know, is the difference between the cost of gas and the cost of electricity. So again, through efficiencies, we can definitely see savings. Sometimes we can need to get more to detail if we are wanting to have a focus on that savings around cost. So getting the detail is going to be really important. And as I said at the beginning, it's about getting that understanding that there is no one size fits all. Lots of technologies will be suitable for lots of different archetypes, but we need to find the right one for the archetype that we are wanting to improve and to retrofit. So the challenge of engaging on heating. So we're talking about talking to residents, talking to people who are in that premises, who are going to potentially have that property retrofitted. It can be challenging when we are talking about technology that isn't mainstream. It can be challenging because we often haven't budgeted, which I would argue is something that we need to make sure that we are doing. We can find that actually personal preferences can really be ingrained. Behaviorally, if we are used to doing something, changing that can be a challenge for a lot of people. There are so many different options for heating. And again, this can be a challenge, but also I would say that it is an opportunity for finding the right one for your residents, for your tenants, for you individually, that is going to help you with that decarbonisation journey and making that a more efficient and thermally comfortable property. Heating has unfortunately historically also been something that hasn't been really gone through with whoever is in that property to make sure that they understand. So we need to face up to that need as something to really start thinking about and Also, think about if we have changing tenancies as well. You might have gone through the long process of really engaging, discussing, thinking about where heating controls sit on walls, for example, and then that tenant moves out and a new tenant comes in and that process has to restart. So there are lots of challenges, but they in most cases can be overcome. One of the key things I think is important to discuss is around that kind of heat movement principles. So there are lots of ways that heat can be transferred to different people. We could spend significantly longer talking around the kind of building physics of how that heat is moving in a particular archetype. But what we want to do is just introduce it so it sparks those conversations, sparks those discussions. So we have, and this might be going back to kind of some lessons you might have had at school around conduction, convection, and radiation. And this is the different way that heat is transferred. Different heating systems will embrace different elements here. So they will kind of have that movement of heat in a different transfer. So thinking about your properties and thinking about the different heat principles is going to be something really important. I really love an image for this. So we've got some images, hopefully you can see on the screen right now, around understanding what that kind of looks like. And sometimes when we are talking to residents, actually pictures can be really powerful. So a use of an image to explain what this means for a particular heating type that you are going to be thinking about can be a really powerful way in being able to kind of convey that really important message about the level of heating, the level of how you will get that heating and what you will feel individually to achieve your level of thermal comfort. So these are just three examples that link back to conduction, convection, and radiation that could be really powerful for you in any communication tools that you want to use. With tools as well, it's important to understand that language. A lot of people will understand a gas boiler and a radiator. We saw from the English Housing Survey that that is the predominant kind of system that we see across all tenures in England. So when we talk about changing that, we need to think about, okay, well, what are we talking about? And sometimes the language can appear quite technical. And so we want to break that down. So the next couple of slides, we're just kind of looking at it. And we called it a kind of heat-related glossary. You might already have a retrofit dictionary or thesaurus that you kind of use and share with residents. But it's a useful way of kind of enabling that understanding and also create more conversations around things. So things like space heating demand, understanding actually what that means is going to be important. So it's understanding that that is the heat load that premises needs to enable those heat services to give the output that it wants for that person. So different properties of different constructions, different ages, different geographical settings will all have a different heat load. So thinking about what that means for the particular premises that you're looking at is going to be really important. That heat loss and transfer coefficient, again, is that rate of heat loss. So you'll remember, hopefully, there was an image earlier of a house with kind of some arrows and different heat losses coming out. It's understanding that is something that we can measure, and that if we have the data, we can provide that information. What we are wanting to do is reduce that amount of heat loss. We don't want heat to be escaping when we don't want it to be. This is, of course, very different in summer and overheating. So when we're talking about heating, we want that heat, we want to be warm, we want to be a thermally comfortable level. Hopefully lots of you on the call will be very familiar by what a U value is. If you're not, this is about the thermal transmittance. It is about the movement of that thermal energy through a particular construction detail. So something like a wall will have a U value. In the UK, we have building regulations which set out the U values for different parts of the building envelope. And that's really important to understand when we have a lot of data presented to us. So new builds built now will have a better U value of the wall construction than when building regulations started or 10 years ago. So understanding what that means for your portfolios, if you have a large portfolio, or for your estate, or for your terrace, or for your individual property, it's going to be really important to understand that is something that you might have as a data source. And you might then have queries from any potential residents around that key issue. Kilowatt hours is then the amount of energy used by 1 kilowatt of an appliance in 1 hour. So it's quite often what we see on our energy bills. So again, residents might be really used to seeing that as a kind of a term that they kind of see on a regular basis, or they might have never actually ever seen that as something that they have ever come across. SMETS 1 and 2, again, something that might be familiar to many of you today, but also might not be. And what that is, SMETS are the different types of smart metering equipment that a lot of premises have. The number refers to kind of the generation. So SMETS 1 is an earlier generation, SMETS 2 is a later, and has more capability of getting kind of data and information. So it's really important to understand that actually that might be something to have a discussion with the residents and the tenants in the first place. Personally, I would, recommend that knowledge is kind of power. And if you have that capacity to get an improved smart meter into your home, absolutely get that information and get that data. We also have things like TRVs, so thermostatic radiator valves, really common in a lot of premises and residents. But when we see it kind of written down, it can then, for a lot of people, then kind of worry that it's something really technical, but it's just a valve that you can kind of control that heating level in that particular room. So again, when we're talking about thermal comfort, different people will want different levels, so they have that ability to change that. And sometimes enabling people to understand that control is possible is a really powerful tool. When we're talking about heating, we're talking about being able to control heating. So again, something really important to make sure that people understand what that is. We've included an image here because sometimes people don't know what that looks like. And likewise, with a kind of programmer or a thermostat, we know of lots of examples where you kind of turn things on or off. Having that level of control, being able to program heating to come on at a particular time, can be a lot more efficient. So if we are only using that energy when we need it to heat the space, we're not going to be leaving things on and utilizing energy potentially when we're not there, or when we don't need it. So again, having that ability, as well as things like being able to turn heating off in the summer when we get warm, that has been sometimes a real challenge in premises when we've seen examples of overheating. So just to have a think about in terms of what that means and what that can be in terms of resident engagement. When we look at different types of heating, we just group them into kind of 4 categories. We could have split them into further categories, had kind of subcategories. We're very much wanting to go for those generalized ones, because what we want to do is kind of apply that broad brush. Think about how this might look when we're communicating with residents, when we're engaging, when we're having that communication piece. So gas central heating, quite common, very familiar to lots of people. Likewise with electric heating, kind of storage heaters, modern storage heaters. Again, renewables coming on board a lot more, solar thermal, different kind of heat pumps, district heating linked to renewables. But we also have those challenges sometimes around rural locations, for example, which haven't been able to engage with the gas network. And so actually, we do still see examples of coal. We see examples of LPG, oil tanks, wood burners, for example. So there are still lots of different types of heating that we see, that we come across. And some of them you'll be really familiar with. Again, I'm a big fan of kind of sharing that visual with people so that we're really clear in terms of what that looks like. So we've just got some examples here. Gas boiler, top left, an example of a gas tank on the kind of right-hand side. We've got a heat pump, an open fire, and then some electric heaters of the plug-in variety, recognizing that actually storage heaters are much more of a fixed example. But in properties where we have failed heating, where we have challenges around fabric, where we have had resistance, we might very often come across examples of plug-in electric heaters because people have felt the need to actually add in additional heat sources. So again, really thinking about what you might see if you are doing a retrofit assessment, if you are doing some community engagement, that you might find lots of other examples of different heating systems that you might come across. So the next couple of slides, we will go through just some examples, the discussions, the kind of different options. We also see lots of different types of gas boilers. So the image on the right hand side, we've got that kind of conventional boiler versus a kind of combi boiler. Again, the properties you are engaging with might have different types of boilers that exist within that property. And again, understanding how it's used, what it looks like to people, is really useful in then engaging if we're thinking about changing that particular heating system. Again, some images here of kind of examples. We've now got a kind of hardwired example on the top left. So things like much more kind of higher efficiency storage heaters, we're seeing can be a really nice solution to lots of properties, particularly as we're seeing really great efficiency. Also, when we have properties that aren't suitable for other heating systems, storage heaters can be a potential possibility for us to use that there. Again, we need to have that dialogue around energy tariffs, around how there are opportunities there, particularly with time of use tariffs that might be available. Again, it will depend on the particular location, rules around metering, those kind of things. So really just make sure you're getting all the details and if necessary, kind of a specialist involved in that particular project. Some of the challenges, again, we know that gas at the moment is cheaper than electricity. So again, having those discussions around efficiency, around how much use that kind of heating system might need in that particular property. We also see some benefits around kind of a change from a kind of a combustion system. You know, we are using that gas source to kind of generate that heat. If we are using electricity, we can also see additional benefits, co-benefits that we not necessarily see. So you might have some other examples on the call today, and I do appreciate if you have any kind of other benefits that you see. But things like if you don't have gas on the property anymore, so if it only had a gas boiler, there's no need for having that annual gas safety check. So this can provide real benefits, particularly if there are challenges around access with the tenant. There might be mental health issues, there might be shift patterns, for example, there might be resistance to having people in from a cultural perspective, or the tenant might have escaped a domestic violence situation. So there are benefits in terms of taking out that gas, leading to one less visit for that person. And that might be a really key benefit that people might see. There might also be other elements as well. So things like not having to pay gas standing charge if you completely can take off the gas from your property. So talk through the different opportunities and really kind of find those specifics, because different people will have different challenges and different opportunities. Heat pumps, we have in this country lots of opportunities for heat pumps. There are ground source heat pumps, there are air source heat pumps, there are air to water heat pumps. In different properties, we might also say air to air heat pumps as well. Lots of different opportunities here. Really get the details around the different costs, both of the install and the running costs, but also kind of the carbon savings as well, and the efficiency of those heat pumps that you really want to get out. Heat pumps provide heat in a different way. If we think about kind of gas boilers, we might want it to come on at 6 p.m, for example, and I know I'm guilty of this. You will feel the radiator to check that it is on. With a heat pump, it's all about maintaining a suitable level of heat throughout the day, rather than having these peaks and troughs. So that user experience of the heat delivered in that home is going to be different. And so unpacking that detail is going to be really important. Again, if we're switching away from kind of gas, moving to an all electric system, there might also be things like kind of gas hobs in the property. Can we shift those onto an electric hob as well? Having that as an opportunity, going to all electric, really seeing great savings on carbon emissions. Press that again. Oops, excuse me, I just skipped over one. And I touched on the idea of heating controls. Regardless of the system that goes in, there will need to be some sort of control provided for the residents to enable that system to be managed. And it's important to think about, are there any key things for that resident? So if, for example, they are in a wheelchair, where is that controller going to be sited to enable them to reach it, to enable them to be able to control the heating in their home? These kind of questions are going to be really important when we talk about people, when we talk about people's ability to be able to feel like they're controlling the system. So again, if you have someone who is blind, for example, or someone who English is their second language, making sure that we are providing the materials that are going to enable them to understand how to use this. This might also include things like one-to-one sessions. So really thinking about that engagement piece, thinking about, okay, we need to do this to enable that person to feel confident in running the system that they have in their home. We've taken this from the Housing Ombudsman. I'm sure you're all very familiar with the Housing Ombudsman in terms of details around complaints of heating. So we're thinking about heating here, we're thinking about options, we're thinking about, okay, it is a challenge, we know it's a challenge. So thinking about, how we can do this. So these are just some of the recommendations, and I would advise you absolutely to go and have a look at the full report. The link is provided here so you can to do that. So thinking about, we know there are challenges and sometimes things don't work out on projects, but putting things right first time is going to be an absolute priority for going forward with retrofit. If things haven't worked, we need to be able to flip that and get that fixed straight away. Linking with contractors, linking with any subcontractors, the whole project team to make sure that that idea is going to be really important. Thinking about tenancy changes, thinking about how that can enable challenges around the heating systems that exist within those properties, making sure that if arrangements change again, that material again is available. So that kind of long-term planning for getting that information to residents is going to be important. And things like gas safety inspections, that can be a real point of stress for many residents because someone is coming into their home. So again, with missed dates, missed times, that can create a point of stress. So how do we do those? And how can we potentially then link them with retrofit assessments so that it is one visit, one time, one date, that then all of that information can be gained from that. So lots of learning has come out of that report. So I'd strongly recommend anyone to go and have a look at that. Resident liaison officers, tenant liaison officers, whatever the terminology you apply, absolutely really essential here. Thinking about upskilling, training, thinking about, how that person needs to be supported with any decarbonisation, with any change of heating. It might be that actually you can offer kind of further engagement. So we've got an example here of kind of a check-in appointment. You might have energy specialists. You might have maintenance team operatives who are amazing at talking to residents about particular technology, control. They might be the ones to really signpost to this kind of opportunity. Budget, again, is going to be really important. So maintenance and replacements, making sure that follow-ups do take place, particularly, I would say, after a full heating season. Really important to kind of understand any particular challenges. Not necessarily the negative things, but the positive things as well. I recently spoke to someone who in a flat who'd had an air source heat pump installed. They'd gone completely off gas, so they were solely electric. And they were so pleased with how it had gone. They loved their new heat pump in the way that it kind of made sure that their home was warm when they needed it. And having that knowledge that it wasn't from a gas kind of supply, that it was from a decarbonised, or as much as decarbonised as the grid is at the moment, source, they were really happy with that. So those positive stories are also really important to address, as well as any challenges, any negatives, but also learning from when things don't work. How can we kind of do that better? Was it planning? Was it, was it a contractor challenge? Was there inclement weather that meant that there were delays? Whatever it might be. And engaging challenge tenants on this change is going to be really important. So there are lots of things that worry people when works are taking place. Disruption to what is normal to you can be a real challenge. So things like mess can be a real challenge. So addressing that's going to be really important. Being worried about potentially being cold with a new heating system. So again, where we see this work well is when we've got pilot examples. If there's a row of terraces and you're starting at one end, can they go and see what that feels like, what it looks like, what it sounds like as well? People worried about losing their gas hob can be a real challenge in terms of, feeling that electric cooking isn't going to kind of give them the same output that they want to. So again, showing examples, talking things through, new settings, new pieces of kit in their home, really unpacking that's going to be really important. Bills and energy costs, real challenge. We know cost of living, we know the energy cap is going to have an impact. So really talking about finance can be really helpful. Within social landlords, within councils, it can be really useful to support that person with other financial elements. So doing things like benefits checkers, those kind of things. What other support elements could be available to them? As well as people being worried about a change in technology resulting in a change of noise complaints, those kind of things can be a challenge and absolutely need to be worked through. So when we're kind of thinking about those things, really thinking about some of the key things we can talk about. Also being realistic, being clear, being transparent, signposting to energy support. Making sure we're not making promises around certain things, being able to provide that trusted source to potentially check the kind of tariff that they're on, look at other options, signpost them to agencies that can maybe help with that. Thermal comfort I've touched on, heat pumps in particular, will provide that constant level of thermal comfort rather than peaks and troughs. So talking through what that might mean is going to be really important. Everyone is different, and I think that's really important. Everyone on the call right now, you will all have different levels of thermal comfort that you like, and you adapt in different ways to make sure that you are thermally comfortable. If you cannot adapt, it then becomes a point of stress and a point of challenge in terms of that. So making sure those discussions are held is going to be really, really important. Linked to that is the fact that people learn differently and in different ways. We know that the reading age in the UK is roughly between an 8 and 11-year-old. So in your language, in your communications, we want to be making sure that we are considering those kind of different elements. So pictures, images, charts, talking to people, the use of play, the use of visuals, kind of this is what a heat pump looks like, for example, on a property can be a really, really powerful tool. Consider accessibility, absolutely, really important here. And do follow up as well. This could be a letter, could be a text message, could be a personal drop-in, could be an open session at a community centre or a faith location. Can be really a good opportunity to kind of do those follow-ups, have those discussions. Electric cooking is really efficient. So again, if we're being efficient with our cooking, we can potentially reduce the amount of energy we're using to do that task, as well as those co-benefits. So if we're not using gas, it's a flame in our homes, we're actually improving our air quality internally. And that has multiple other co-benefits that go beyond what a heating replacement will do. So we're really thinking about considering residents in different ways, really thinking about different approaches that we can apply, thinking about how people actually currently use heating and maybe some of the challenges around that, thinking about digital literacy, and we have a masterclass on kind of digital accessibility for residents, really thinking about English when it's not the first language. How do you approach this with other things? If you're talking about rent increases, for example, how do you address that with English as not as a first language? Thinking about, how there might be need for other resources, to signpost to other resources and different kind of technologies to be able to do that. This is a really nice kind of example that we like to kind of share. So it's taken from the Energy Saving Trust. It is taken from a pilot project on the electrification of heat, and it was a demonstration project. But there's some really nice personal viewpoints given forward about, in particular, heat pumps. There are other examples on the Energy Saving Trust website that I would really recommend you going and having a look at. It talks about people really personal, like on a personal level. And when we're communicating with our residents, with our tenants, it's going to be really important to bring forward that personal detail, that it's not just a number, it's not just a piece of technology, that it's going in to help support that person in having a warm environment when they need it. So there are two examples, kind of two people really talking about this example here and how actually they were both worried about different things. So Stephen in this case wasn't really worried about disruption, but Dina was. And so it's understanding as a family how both of them had different concerns for this. Dust and installs, particularly with some of the peripherals, can be a challenge. And so that's highlighted again. And so understanding how that disruptive piece can be really challenging for lots of people, which potentially can lead to resistance, is a really good thing to kind of talk through. So I really recommend you kind of having a look at this case study. Overall, though, Dina and Stephen are really pleased with their heat pump. It resulted in one of them working in the office rather than working at home when the project was being installed. Some people won't be able to not be in that home whilst work kind of goes through. So thinking about how that can be then worked through. Digitalization, again, something really important to think about. Not everyone has a smartphone, not everyone has Wi-Fi. How are we going to deal with that? I do know there are lots of projects at the moment about exploring 5G connections, particularly in social housing, to combat these challenges. So again, thinking about how people will control that and therefore considering what potential other options there might be. Absolutely thinking about how champions might be really important here, that subject matter experts, that community champions might be really helpful here. Thinking about training, thinking about upskilling people. So linking in with higher education organisations who potentially can link into any project that you are proposing to go forward. So absolutely giving that advance notice, talk through the options, think about the need for replacing heating. So we have a system that at the moment, but we want to improve that. We want to decarbonise it. We want to have a more efficient way of getting that heating into our home. Seeing things from multiple perspectives is going to be really important. And we've seen a lot of examples where frequently asked questions as a document shared, printed electronically, talked through, can be a really useful way of kind of enabling people to understand that their question possibly has been asked before, but there is no such thing as a stupid question. So ask those questions, find those answers, and get that dialogue going. So kind of bringing it all together before we have our kind of poll and our word cloud. One size does not fit all, so you need to find the right heating solution. You might find obsolete models in the premises you go into, particularly if you have had limited access in the past. Warranty periods are going to be really important here in terms of that long-term maintenance, those servicing, what might be needed. Thinking about actually people's ability to use a search engine to find out that information. So signposting to local libraries can be really helpful here, and really think about your skills in your team, regardless of whether that's 5 or 50, depending on the size and scale of your project, thinking about who's going to be the best to kind of give out that information to support a particular tenant with particular queries, worries, challenges, or rejection of the proposed retrofit project. So there are lots of opportunities. As I mentioned at the beginning, we always like to signpost you to lots of different resources. So in the RISE project, we have lots of different toolkits that you can utilize and kind of use in your retrofit projects. We do have lots and lots of masterclasses. Keep an eye out for live ones if you like to attend those, or we do recordings so you can have a look, play those back, share them in team meetings. And we also have lots of other resources as well from other fabulous organisations who are also really wanting to support retrofits going forward. So we've used resources from the Open University. So if you really want to get more detail on kind of energy in buildings, that's a really great module to kind of go and have a look at. As I mentioned before, that case study was taken from the Energy Savings Trust. They have lots of really useful articles that can be shared with colleagues, but also potentially with residents who want more information, want examples. And then which, as a kind of consumer-based organisation, also have lots of really great resources on heating. Again, thinking from a language and communication perspective, a really nice opportunity to kind of share those with your team, but also with residents. If you do want to get in touch, you have something specific, please do email us. So I would suggest going to the rise@turntown.co.uk email address. That is kind of looked after by lots of our fabulous colleagues. If they can't answer it directly, they will come and ask for a response. And so do ask any questions using that. Also like to just signpost you to the riseretrofit.org.uk website. And if you want to email me as well, feel free. My email address is available on the slides.